If a flawless appearance can hide a dark truth, then St. Mary's General Hospital is the clearest example. Nestled in a quiet suburb, this pristine white building is praised as a symbol of medical excellence. But behind the bright lights and polite smiles lies an untold story waiting to explode. On what seemed like an ordinary morning, Angela Parker, a young nurse with hopeful eyes, stepped through the hospital doors. She had no idea that each step was taking her deeper into a world where silence cut sharper than words, and where courage would be the only key to survival. St. Mary's General Hospital, a gleaming white building nestled in a quiet suburb, had long been hailed as a symbol of medical excellence. But behind its pristine exterior, an untold story was waiting to surface. On a crisp, clear morning, Angela Parker stepped through the hospital's grand entrance. Dressed neatly in her nurse's uniform, hair tied high, eyes bright with hope and determination, she was ready. A young, talented, and passionate nurse, Angela believed this would be the place where she could truly make a difference in the lives of patients who needed her. But from her very first steps, something felt off. The hallways were gleaming and smelled of antiseptic. Machines hummed steadily. And yet, a cold silence wrapped around her like a warning. As she approached the nurse's station, the hum of quiet laughter suddenly faded. Eyes darted away. Her heart skipped a beat. Still smiling, Angela spoke up, her voice gentle but steady. "Hi everyone, I'm Angela Parker, the new nurse. Could someone point me to the head nurse's office?" A blonde nurse flashed a strained smile, as if it had just been put on, and pointed the way. Angela nodded in thanks, her footsteps echoing heavily down the long corridor. The welcome here wasn't quite what she'd hoped. On the way to the head nurse's office, she crossed paths with an older doctor, tall, salt and pepper hair, commanding presence. Her heart lifted slightly. Perhaps this would be the first real connection she could build. "Good morning, doctor," Angela said brightly, reaching out a hand. "I'm Angela Parker, the new nurse. It's a pleasure to meet you." The doctor, William Greaves, barely glanced her way. His steely gray eyes cool, he gave a curt nod. "Let's hope you've been thoroughly briefed. We maintain very high standards here." Before she could respond, he was already walking past her, leaving her alone in the empty hallway. Once again, she swallowed the lump rising in her throat. She was used to this. Her mother had once told her, "You have to be twice as strong, but never let them see you break." For her mother, for herself. Angela straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and knocked gently on the next door. The road ahead would not be easy, but she knew she was ready to face the fight, not just for herself, but for others like her, those who deserve a fair chance. Inside the head nurse's office, Angela was greeted with the icy stare of a middle-aged woman. Her face seemed frozen by years of rigidity and routine. "Miss Parker, is it? Come in. We have a lot to do, and I expect you to keep up." Her voice was flat, devoid of warmth, as if referring to a new item just added to inventory. Angela pressed her lips together and gave a small nod. She'd seen that look before, heard that tone before, but each time it met her, a dull ache still settled in her chest. Her first morning blurred into a whirlwind of paperwork, protocols, orientations, and name tags. Angela tried to smile, tried to start conversations, tried to blend in. But no matter which room or hallway she entered, she could feel the eyes on her, suspicious, measuring, and at times, painfully condescending. As she passed a group of nurses, their chatter died down. Then, like a draft at her back, whispers floated through the air. "I don't know who thought hiring her was a good idea. She really doesn't fit in here." Angela's heart sank, but her back stayed straight, her steps steady. No reply, no sideways glance. Her mother had taught her, no one can take your pride unless you hand it to them. By the end of the day, Angela was packing up at her locker when her hand paused mid-motion. Behind the wall, two voices murmured just loud enough to pierce, "They just needed a different colored face to show off, that's all." "Yeah, she won't last long." The words sliced through her like a thin, sharp blade. Angela closed her eyes, forcing herself to swallow the rising lump in her throat. She knew, if she cried now, she'd lose. It was dusk when Angela left the hospital, stepping out to the cold, empty bus stop. She curled up on the hard plastic bench, her thin coat no match for the creeping chill. She pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Hello? It's Mama." Her mother's voice answered, warm, gentle, wrapping around her like the arms that once held her on long, tearful nights. Angela bit her lip to stifle a sob. "Mama, today was harder than I thought." There was silence on the other end. Then her mother spoke, calm, steady, and fierce. "Angela Marie Parker, remember this. You are the legacy of the strongest women to walk this earth. You're not just fighting for yourself, baby. You're walking those halls for every little black girl who'll come after you because you held that door open first." Angela shut her eyes, letting the words run through her veins like lifeblood, steadying every beat of her heart. "I understand, Mama," she whispered. Just then, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up near the bus stop. Through the tinted glass, she caught the sharp, cold stare of Dr. Greaves. It wasn't veiled disdain anymore. It was open challenge. The car sped off, leaving Angela with her clenched jaw and rising fury. But when the bus arrived, she stood, head high, shoulders square. Tomorrow would be another battle, and she, Angela Parker, would be ready. The next morning, Angela arrived at the hospital early. She wanted everyone to see. She wasn't backing down. She wasn't slowing her pace. But St. Mary's seemed just as ready to push her even harder. From the very first patient rounds, Angela noticed a pattern. She was always assigned the most difficult cases, the grumpiest patients, the messiest paperwork, the most complex procedures, duties that should have been distributed fairly among the team. Amid the busy morning, Dr. Greaves appeared, a thick file in hand. "Nurse Parker," he called out loudly, making sure everyone at the bustling nurses' station could hear, "I trust you've memorized all the protocols. We can't afford any mistakes." He emphasized the word mistakes with sharp intention, like a blade sharpened and waiting to strike. Angela met his gaze calmly. "Yes, doctor, I'm fully prepared." She knew every step she took here was like walking on thin ice. One slip, and they'd gladly use it as a reason to cast her out. Later that day, Angela was assigned to care for one of the most notoriously difficult patients, Mr. Johnson, an old man with a bitter temper and deeply rooted prejudice. The moment she entered the room, he glared at her and snapped, "I don't want you touching me." "I already told them. I don't need a colored nurse." Angela clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. But she still stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "Mr. Johnson, I'm here to care for your health, and I will do my job to the best of my ability." Throughout the bandage changes, the blood pressure checks, and wound assessments, she endured a barrage of cruel, demeaning words, but every movement remained precise, every response professional, every smile calm and unshaken. She understood true strength wasn't about striking back. It was about refusing to let the poison in. By the time she left the room, sweat dotted her brow, but her steps didn't falter. Outside, Dr. Greaves was waiting, that cold half-smile lingering on his face. "Everything all right, Nurse Parker?" "Mr. Johnson is stable. His care requirements have been completed," she replied, voice steady as steel. In the flicker of surprise that crossed Greaves' face, Angela saw something. He hadn't expected her to hold her ground this long. As evening fell and Angela was organizing charts, the whispers crept in again. "She's just here to fill a diversity slot." "Yeah, she won't last. Just wait." The words no longer stunned her like they did on the first day. They were like thorns now, sharp but fleeting, because inside her, a quiet fire had started to burn. A fire fueled by self-respect and by a resolve not just to endure, but to change things. At the bus stop in the dimming light, Angela once again saw the familiar black Mercedes glide past. The window rolled down just enough for her to see Dr. Greaves' cold stare. He sneered, "Still taking the bus?" "Figures. A nurse can only go so far." Angela didn't answer. She simply tightened her grip on her bag strap, her eyes fixed firmly on the distance ahead. Because not everyone with a luxury car and a title is a winner. The true winner is the one who refuses to lose their dignity. And Angela Parker, standing alone at a bus stop in the chilly dusk, was that kind of winner. Tomorrow would be another battle, and she would keep walking, for herself, for those who would come after her. That morning, something felt different in the air at the hospital. As Angela stepped into the nurse's station, she was met not with cold whispers behind her back, but with an excited buzz of curiosity. "VIP admission," one nurse whispered. "Someone very important, I heard." Angela looked up and noticed colleagues fixing their hair, adjusting their uniforms. Even those who usually ignored her were suddenly looking unusually eager. Moments later, Dr. Greaves appeared, his face still stern, but his voice today carried a surprising note of polish. "Nurse Parker," he called out, "I want you to personally care for our new patient. Room 412, Mr. Thomas Edwards. Handle with special care." Angela paused for a moment. A VIP patient. And they were assigning him to her? Part of her knew this wasn't a compliment, just another setup, another test. But she also knew she couldn't refuse. "Yes, doctor," she replied evenly. Room 412 glowed with soft, warm light. On the bed lay a middle-aged man, both arms in bright white casts. But what struck Angela wasn't the injuries. It was his eyes, sharp, clear, and strikingly aware. Angela approached with her usual calm smile. "Good morning, sir. I'm Nurse Angela Parker. I'll be taking care of you during your stay." Mr. Edwards returned her smile. His gaze scanned her face quickly, as if reading thoughts she hadn't spoken. "Pleasure to meet you, Nurse Parker," he said, his voice deep and reassuring. "I believe I'm in the hands of the best." Angela was caught off guard by the genuine kindness in his tone. Since stepping into St. Mary's, it had been a long time since someone saw her as a person, not through the lens of skin color or assumption. As she checked vitals and changed dressings, Mr. Edwards kept the conversation going, his questions thoughtful, never superficial. "How long have you been in this profession?" "How are you finding things here at St. Mary's?" Angela answered carefully but honestly. She didn't complain, didn't elaborate. She simply said that sometimes new environments take time to adjust to. Mr. Edwards smiled, his eyes sensing what she hadn't said aloud. "I believe," he said quietly, "the real challenge isn't the job, it's how people treat each other." Angela gripped the stethoscope in her hand a little tighter. He hadn't named anyone. He hadn't needed to. And somehow, his words warmed her more than any direct defense ever could. Just then, Dr. Greaves burst in, grinning from ear to ear. "Mr. Edwards, a real honor to care for you personally," he said, his voice dripping with a strange, unfamiliar sweetness. Angela stood silently, observing a different face of the man she thought she already knew too well. "I trust Nurse Parker is taking excellent care of you?" Greaves asked with a thin smile. "Better than I could have hoped," Mr. Edwards replied, his eyes gleaming with something only Angela caught, a sharpness beneath the calm. As Dr. Greaves launched into treatment plans, Angela quietly continued her duties. But something had shifted inside her. For the first time, someone saw her, past her skin, beyond her title, ignoring the bias that had clung to her since day one. What she didn't know was this meeting would become a turning point. The door to change had opened, just a crack, but it was enough for the first light to shine through. In the days that followed, Angela found herself returning to room 412 often, not just for medical care, but because, in that space, she had found something rare at St. Mary's: peace. Mr. Thomas Edwards, even lying in bed with both arms immobilized, carried a quiet authority. He listened closely to Angela's stories about difficult patients, endless night shifts, and the quiet loneliness she hid behind every smile. Not once did he show her pity. Not once did he make her feel small. There was only patience, trust, and to Angela, that was more valuable than any compliment. One afternoon, as Angela was changing his dressings, voices drifted in from the hallway outside. "I don't trust that Parker woman," a sharp female voice said. "We can't have someone like her taking care of a VIP," another added with open disdain. Angela's hands paused for just a moment. She took a deep breath, steadying her focus. "You all right, Nurse Parker?" Mr. Edwards asked, his voice calm, but his eyes razor-sharp. Angela smiled faintly and said lightly, "Just focusing on the task at hand, sir." Mr. Edwards studied her face for a long time, taking in the quiet resilience she never allowed to surface too openly. Then, thoughtfully, he said, "You know, people reveal who they truly are when they think no one's watching." Angela looked up and their eyes met. In that moment, she understood. He had seen it all. Not just her actions, but everything others thought they had hidden behind polite smiles and crisp white uniforms. That day, Angela left room 412 with a heavy heart, but also a glimmer of hope. What she didn't know was that behind that door, Thomas Edwards had been documenting everything he had witnessed. The snide remarks, the bias, the subtle power plays. He wasn't just a patient. He was gathering the truth, piece by piece, preparing for something far greater. While her colleagues still saw her as an outsider, somewhere behind the scenes, a hand was quietly redrawing the power map of the hospital. And Angela, the quiet fighter enduring each day, would not be alone for much longer. Soon, the storm would come. But this time, she would be at its center, and she would be the one still standing. 1 week later, Angela had barely stepped into her shift when she sensed something was off. The hospital buzzed with urgency. People moved briskly, faces tense. Nurses whispered to one another, eyes filled with anticipation. Something big was coming. Before Angela could ask, Dr. Greaves appeared, his expression serious, but his eyes gleaming with something else, like a man tasting power. "Nurse Parker," he said loudly, making sure others could hear, "this afternoon, you'll assist in a highly critical emergency surgery. Several board members and major donors will be observing. I trust you won't embarrass us." Angela felt her heartbeat thudding in her chest. She knew this wasn't just an assignment. This was a test, a trap. If she failed, even a single misstep, it would be the perfect excuse to eliminate her. But if she succeeded... Angela lifted her chin and replied, voice steady, "Yes, doctor, I'll prepare thoroughly." The next few hours were a whirlwind of tension. Angela double-checked surgical instruments, reviewed procedures, and rehearsed every step in her mind. She allowed no margin for error. Before the surgery, she stood alone in the locker room, staring into the mirror. Behind the mask and surgical gown, only her eyes showed. Eyes of someone who had seen challenge before, but who still carried her pride and a relentless will to prove her worth. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, "Never let them see you break." Today, she would live those words, fully. The operating room glared under bright, sterile lights. Angela stood at the surgical table, posture firm, grip steady, focus razor-sharp. Beside her, Dr. Greaves prepared to begin, surrounded by surgeons, board members, and donors, dressed in crisp white coats. Every move, every breath, felt scrutinized under dozens of watching eyes. Angela felt sweat slide down her spine. The operation began. Inside the thick, suffocating tension of the OR, Angela moved with laser precision. She anticipated each instruction, matched the rhythm of the lead surgeon, adapted fluidly. But then, at the most crucial moment, she saw it. Dr. Greaves' hand hesitated. The scalpel drifted slightly off course. Angela knew one wrong cut, and the patient could suffer catastrophic damage. There was no time to hesitate. With a calm, clear voice, she spoke up. "Doctor, based on the patient's anatomy, I recommend adjusting the angle of incision. The current path risks damaging the artery." The room fell silent. All eyes snapped to her. A moment stretched into eternity. Dr. Greaves turned sharply, his glare burning through her. But in that instant, he also realized, surrounded by so many witnesses, he couldn't dismiss her without cause. Through clenched teeth, he replied, "Very well. Let's see if you're right." He adjusted the scalpel's direction as she suggested. Seconds later, the bleeding was controlled. The operation proceeded more smoothly. And in that quiet shift, something unspoken passed through the room. Angela had just prevented a surgical disaster. When the procedure ended successfully, Angela cleaned the instruments and walked out, quiet murmurs trailing behind her. She knew she'd just climbed a mountain of pressure. But she also knew the undercurrents at St. Mary's wouldn't stay quiet for long, because in that moment, beneath surgical lights and behind masked faces, a much larger battle had begun. And on the other side of that battle, Thomas Edwards was ready too. Angela had just changed into her uniform when she received a summons from Dr. Greaves. She didn't need to guess what was coming. She walked the long, narrow hallway with steady steps and sharp eyes, fully aware she was heading into an uneven confrontation. When she entered the small conference room, Dr. Greaves was already there, face flushed with rage, gripping the armrest of his chair like he was holding back a storm. He didn't waste a second. The fury poured out of him. "Who do you think you are, giving me orders in front of everyone? You humiliated me in front of the entire hospital board." Angela stood tall, her voice calm but firm. "I was doing my job, doctor. That decision saved the patient's life." Dr. Greaves narrowed his eyes, his lips curling into a cruel line. "People like you never should have been allowed through the doors. If it weren't for that ridiculous diversity policy, you'd have never had the chance." Each word landed like a lash, but Angela didn't bow her head. She had endured too much to fall because of a few hateful sentences. Then, a voice cut through the air, from the doorway slightly ajar. "Maybe it's you who doesn't belong here, doctor." Greaves. All heads turned. There stood Thomas Edwards. His arms were still bandaged, but he held himself with commanding presence. No longer just a patient, he entered the room like a man in charge, his gaze freezing the room in place. "I think," Mr. Edwards began, each word clear and deliberate, "it's time we had an honest conversation about the toxic culture in this institution." Dr. Greaves paled, stammering, Mr. Edwards, this is an internal matter." But Edwards didn't let him finish. He stepped into the center of the room, looked at Angela with warmth in his eyes, then turned back to Greaves. "I've seen enough prejudice, enough abuse of power, and I have more than enough influence to clean it up." Angela stood speechless. Dr. Greaves was frozen, stunned into silence. The room was so quiet, you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Mr. Edwards pulled out his phone and began projecting recordings, audio clips, video footage. Clips of nurses making discriminatory remarks, clips of Dr. Greaves verbally demeaning Angela. One after another, each piece of evidence landed like a hammer blow against the false wall St. Mary's had built for years. "She's not alone," Edwards said, eyes blazing, "and I won't be silent either." Nowhere left to hide, Dr. Greaves stood like stone, exposed. Mr. Edwards turned to Angela, voice firm yet kind. "Nurse Parker, would you like to file a formal complaint?" "I'll back you every step of the way." Angela looked into his eyes, eyes that held not just power, but recognition, the kind she had waited her whole career to receive. Her heart tightened with emotion, but her voice stayed steady. "I'm ready." That day, the old doors of St. Mary's began to shake. No more whispers behind her back, no more pitying stares or quiet scorn. The masks had fallen. The truth was out. And Angela Parker, the nurse once dismissed and isolated, now stood at the eye of the storm, her dignity intact, her fire lit. Because justice sometimes only needs one brave voice to ignite it. News of the confrontation between Angela Parker, Dr. Greaves, and Thomas Edwards spread like wildfire through St. Mary's Hospital. Within hours, every hallway buzzed with whispers, curious, anxious, and electric. Those who had once ignored Angela now murmured to one another. Some avoided her gaze. Others looked at her with admiration, though few had the courage to approach. But Angela didn't need pity or belated congratulations. She simply continued her work in silence, tending to her patients as if nothing had changed. Only her eyes betrayed something new, a light, the kind that shines in someone who has reclaimed their voice. That afternoon, the hospital's board called an emergency meeting. The entire institution seemed to hold its breath. Angela was invited to attend, accompanied by legal counsel, and of course, Thomas Edwards, who no longer concealed his identity as CEO of Healthcare United, the major shareholder in the region's medical system. The boardroom was packed. Familiar faces, people who had once turned their backs on her, sat silent, tense. Mr. Edwards was the first to speak. His tone was calm, but each word cut with steel. "I did not come here as just another patient. I arrived expecting excellent medical care. What I witnessed instead was blatant discrimination, prejudice, and abuse of authority." He presented the evidence he had gathered. discriminatory remarks from staff, bias in work assignments, deliberate efforts to undermine Angela, not because of her competence, but because of her skin color. When the recordings played, Dr. Greaves's razor-sharp insults, the mocking laughter of some nurses, no one could lift their head. Dr. Greaves sat motionless, his face drained of all color. Once the evidence was laid bare, the board had no choice but to suspend Dr. Greaves immediately, pending disciplinary investigation. A full audit of the hospital's internal culture was also announced. Then, in the stunned silence, Thomas Edwards turned to Angela. His voice was soft, but firm. "I'd like to nominate Nurse Parker to lead this transformation as Chief Diversity Officer of St. Mary's." The room froze. In that moment, Angela felt every sleepless night of studying, every silent tear cried alone, every moment she'd pretended to be strong while her heart quietly broke, had all led to this. An invitation of honor, a heavy burden, yes, but one lined with purpose. Angela rose to her feet, her fist clenched in resolve. She nodded. "I'm ready." Her gaze swept across the room, at the faces who once doubted her, dismissed her, and in her chest rose an unshakable belief. Change is possible, as long as someone dares to start it. That afternoon, for the first time in what felt like forever, the sky above St. Mary's seemed bluer. The sunlight rested gently on Angela's shoulders as she walked out of the building. A cool wind brushed past, and in her heart, a new chapter had begun. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever endured in silence, waiting for the day they'd be treated with the dignity they deserve. From her very first week in the new role, Angela knew she wouldn't be warmly welcomed. The powerful statement made at that board meeting may have shaken St. Mary's, but dismantling a system that had rotted from the inside wasn't something that could be done with a speech or a shiny new title. Angela allowed herself no illusions. She spent her first days walking through every department, listening to the small stories no one had ever bothered to record. She sat with nurses who had once sighed in helplessness, with young doctors quietly bearing unfair treatment, with janitorial and support staff who were often invisible. She didn't take notes on a laptop. She didn't create lifeless reports. She listened, with her heart, with the empathy of someone who had lived it. Not everyone was eager to open up. Many looked at her with suspicion. Some silently protested with cold stares or disapproving nods. But Angela wasn't discouraged. She knew that breaking down a wall sometimes meant knocking on it thousands of times, with small, steady, patient acts. She began holding informal circles, safe spaces where people could speak their fears, frustrations, and long-hidden wounds. Slowly, a few doors began to open. Some nurses who once avoided her began showing up to the discussions. A few senior doctors started asking about the new equity and diversity training programs. Outside, the media began to take notice of the quiet revolution at St. Mary's. Articles didn't just recount past failures, they celebrated the courage of those demanding decency. Angela became the face of that transformation, though she'd never expected to step into the spotlight this way. One day, she saw a familiar, hesitant face at her office door. It was Sarah, one of the nurses who once whispered behind her back, now holding a cup of coffee in both hands. I'd like to join the working group on creating a safer workplace," she said. If that's okay with you." Angela simply smiled and accepted the coffee. No grand words were needed. She knew that real change often began with small, honest acts like this. Weeks passed, then months. St. Mary's was no longer the place Angela entered each morning with a knot in her chest. Its hallways now echoed with friendly greetings. Its meeting rooms no longer hosted performative meetings, but real conversations about values, about people. And Angela, still in the same simple white uniform, walked through those doors each day with lighter steps. She knew the path ahead would still be long. She knew that old prejudice would occasionally resurface, but the seed had taken root, and she would nurture it until it grew into a forest. One quiet weekend afternoon, Angela sat in the hospital courtyard reviewing the latest report when a message lit up her phone. It was from Thomas Edwards. "I just proposed scaling your reform model across the entire healthcare United system. Get ready. You're not just changing St. Mary's, you're about to change the industry." Angela set the phone down and looked up at the sky, now bathed in golden evening light. What filled her wasn't triumph, but a deep, quiet gratitude. Gratitude for the hardship that forged her. Gratitude for the people who forced her to grow stronger. And gratitude for herself, for not giving up. Tomorrow would be another journey, but this time, she wouldn't walk it alone. And this time, she wasn't just fighting to survive. She was clearing the path for everyone who would come after her so they could walk it with their heads held high. 1 year after the Quiet Revolution began at St. Mary's, Angela Parker stood on the stage at the National Conference on Healthcare and Social Equity. Soft lights glowed above her, casting a warm sheen across her hair. Her crisp white uniform had been replaced by a graceful blue suit. But in her eyes, in her voice, Angela was still the same woman, sincere, strong, and unwavering in her purpose. Before her sat hundreds of delegates from hospitals across the country, healthcare leaders, professionals, and skeptics who once believed change was impossible. Now, they listened to her as if she were a lighthouse in the dark. Angela told her story without embellishment. She didn't hide the moments when she nearly broke, when the weight of bias almost erased her. She spoke of cold stares, whispered insults, challenges designed to drain her resolve. But she also spoke of persistence, of unexpected hands reaching out, of how one action at the right moment, one voice speaking up, can shift an entire system. When she finished, the auditorium fell silent, a heavy, breathless pause. Then applause erupted like a wave. Not because she was a symbol, not because she had won, but because she had reminded them that in each of us, there is a part that refuses to be silenced, a part that believes kindness and justice are not gifts. They are rights worth fighting for. As Angela stepped down from the stage, Thomas Edwards, now a trusted ally and dear friend, was waiting at the bottom of the steps. He extended his hand, gripping hers with warmth and pride. "I believed in you from the very beginning, Nurse Parker," he said. "And today, you've given all of us a reason to believe in the future." Angela smiled, a light, steady smile like early morning sun, and replied, "I'm just one part of it. This journey is far from over, but now none of us have to walk it alone." That night, alone by the hotel window, watching city lights shimmer in the distance, Angela opened the small notebook she always carried. She wrote, "One voice can light up a dark room. One person standing firm can move a generation, and one heart that never gives up can open the door to an entirely new world." She closed the notebook and smiled. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter, but this time she wasn't walking just to survive. She was walking to lead the way.